Hello everyone, a good afternoon to everyone, and my most warm welcome to all the participants, the speakers, the distinguished guests, principal, and the members of the advisory committee. We are connected together here today for the 3 days global lecture series, and I hope that the valuable insights of all these speakers will enrich us. The Global Lecture Series offers a platform for global contemporary topics with the outstanding global speakers. I hope the discourse of this lecture series will ignite and inspire minds to think and rethink about the topics. Thank you, everyone. Now I welcome the principal of our college, Dr. Shamila Rani, the chairperson of this 3-day global lecture series. Welcome, ma'am. Ah, ma'am. Hello everyone, there has been some technical problem. The principal of our college could not connect with us. Now I request the speaker of 3-day global lecture series, Honorable Dr. Ishrat Alam sir, to please start with his lecture.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yeah, sir.
Can you? Yeah. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge my gratitude to all of you, especially Dr. Mrs. Sharmila Rani, Principal of SSLNT Mahila Mahavidyalaya, BBMKU, team of conveners, and Dr. Mrs. Tanuja Kumari, the organizing secretary. I must say, very enterprising organizing secretary. Members of organizing committee, technical committee, and fellow participants. This is, I must begin by acknowledging that Dr. Tanuja asked me to say a few words. And given the time limit is 20 minutes, I suppose, so I would hurriedly try to say a few things about rewriting history during the pandemics. Whenever we think about writing history, the immediate problem before us comes about defining history. What is history supposed to be? So, in a very simple, plain word, we would say that it is narration of the past or narrative of our past. And this definition obviously seems very simple, simplistic, but it will lead to problems or probability questions, which is two questions would be: first, out of what do we reconstruct the narrative? And second would be the whose past do we reconstruct? So for the first problem is concerned, which is which is faced by every historian, about the sources. And when we are thinking of writing about pandemics, especially more, take a long survey, since we are historians. At least I'm like a student of history, so I would go by the past. I won't be repetitive. In the previous lecture also I had some few things, but here today I will be confining myself into the framework of historiography of pandemics, how to approach this subject. So conventionally, history, when you start writing history, uh, even if it is a detailed history, we always select facts, and selection is based on the information available in hand. So this is not because the information, especially for more recent times, considering present times even, they are far too expensive to be set forth in its entirety in our narrative, but also because a mechanical laying out of all the information available will necessarily place emphasis on things on which we are informed better and make us treat the other aspects as if they were necessarily less important, just for the reason that we are less informed about those events. Pandemic is one of those problems, because we don't find, if you go into ancient literature, medieval literature, both of Europe and Asia and the New World, we don't have regular information on them, on this theme. First of all, because of the irregularity of the occurrences, God forbid, that was there. But because of this, the problem becomes important. Now, the problem is that if we take the example of present day, if we go by the newspaper reports, so we know about the broad trends which if the newspapers are reporting about India, that sometimes it is very alarming, sometimes it is very encouraging that the trend is slowing down or going down, it is tapering off. Then the other day we hear about the spiking off of the disease. Now to set the balance right, we must select on a general view of the historical process, on which I shall be saying something later on, the balance to be created between facts and their interpretation, uh, since there are many gaps also. So now, for 21st century assessment of pandemics, it is easy because there are many sources. The print media is there, the visual media is there, and then the WHO is there, on which I had emphasized earlier. Their reports are coming, secretary, even World Health Organization Secretary's report is quite comprehensive, and they are monitoring internationally the developments taking place on the pandemic. So for present, it is all right, but for past, it is very difficult to gather so much information, because the literate elite of the time, I suppose, did not deign to leave behind any direct record about it. We may even argue that no, since there are huge gaps in our information, I will elaborate upon that later on. So we must give some room for controlled speculation. We might speculate something on the basis of whatever little information we could gather from our sources, because this is important in constructing a historical narrative as balanced selection. Secondly, the other problem which I was talking about, of whose history. So today's task is made easy by Dr. Tanuja because she asked me to concentrate on pandemics. So we will say that, the second problem is writing history of pandemics. Uh, uh, what I find is, and we should note about it, we should take note of this fact is that when Herodotus was writing, he had a different perspective. When succeeding him, other Greek writers and Latin writers were writing, Thucydides and others, they had a different perspective. So then subsequently, when we come to modern time, medieval period and modern period, we keep on changing our perspective. I would say our goalposts. So these perspectives are one of the major, you know, major theme on which you will find that this is the matrix around which our appreciation of the historical problems developed. For example, I can take the example of Indian history, then you will find, various paradigms from time to time. Earlier it were imperialist historians, before that Mughal historians, before that other historians were there. They had a different perspective about empire and for people. People was not their focus, but we do write history of peasantry and agrarian systems, other things on the basis of whatever information are there in the imperial records, dealing with those things. Recent, of late, what we found is that in the many of these agrarian records, there are references to various episodes of pandemics also. I have given, we always give the example of, the brush documents where we find, occurrences of smallpoxes. Then there are interpretations of presence of leprosy as early as Indus civilization, and smallpox or even earlier. So those kind of things are, this is likely based on speculation, but these speculations should be closer to what Asia Berlin had said had given the title of the book, "The Idea of Reality." It should be close to the reality. It should not be a wild, chasing a wild goose. So let us return now to the question of how, in the historical narrative, we should assign space and weights to different elements of society, culture, polity, and process of change. Uh, Before 19th century, our focus, the focus of the study of historians was different. And suddenly, in the mid 19th century, when the contribution to the critique of political economy was written by Marx, he made a very significant one-liner is there, which I would like to quote, that one cannot judge a period of transformation by its own consciousness, which means that society, we should not we should not write on the basis of what they perceived, but what is our, how do we judge each past society by our present consciousness. It might appear illogical. However illogical this may appear, it is inescapable situation, and it has its own implications. The primary implication is that our values, our view of the world changes, our conception of a scope of history changes and keeps on changing. As I was saying that, when this watershed event of French Revolution took place in 1789, I shall be emphasizing on that further. That coincides with the age. Here I would like to introduce the debate, that it coincides with the age which we have broadly identified as age of enlightenment, where Rationality is, holding the central position. Everything should be rationalized. The study should be rationalized. They realize that the peoples have inalienable rights. The French Revolution emphasized gender equality. French Revolution also emphasized many things. And in that process, you will find that uh, the principle of adult suffrage in polity was first propounded in the Jacobin Constitution of 1794. Before that, we can't look for it, although we always claim that we are such and such country had very old history of democracy, but those are not supported by hard facts. So this also tells us about the march of every man to the center stage in the ideal history of the present day historians. Similarly, women's history is developed. Gender history also we trace from French Revolution. And why in French Revolution we find all these things happening? And they are, if you look into, I was, the other day I was looking into uh, documents of French Revolution, and I found interesting information there, where it is reflected that there are debates going on during the French Revolution about pandemics also. So to that point, I will come again. In other words, history itself may be said to have changed the nature of history, and such a change of historical perspective brought about by the course of events is illustrated, as I was saying, by two notable examples. The French Revolution was one, which for over a century afterwards was realized as the greatest, break in the property system in the world, especially in the case of agrarian relations. But after the Soviet Revolution of 1917, the scope further widened, and Marc Bloch in his French rural history also told us that the French Revolution would appear essentially as marking a continuity rather than break, since in France, only about a third of the landlords lost their lands. By the same token, the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, with the impact of globalization and others, also reflects the limitation of Soviet revolution. Efficiency of then it becomes that efficiency of market takes the center stage, irrespective of the property system. That is, it is now considered, market is considered the key to the economic development. Even British rule in India is being seen by some as positive phenomenon of this kind of thing. Uh, uh, Here I would like to mention second factor, that is debate about human thought, how it developed. I will not go into much detail of the development of human thought. We all know about it. But I would like to say a few things about Immanuel Kant, because he is one of the leading pillars of Enlightenment period, and he is writing about these things, and he is dealing with many subjects. So, in order to understand pandemics, let us see what was his reflections on this. He emphasizes morals. He says that morals must come not from authority or tradition, not from religious commands, but from reason. He also thought he had it sorted. The funny thing is that his answers were almost the opposite of Bentham's. I will not go into the larger debate. Kant started not with the pain and pleasure, but rather with the fact that mankind's distinguishing feature is our possession of reason. Therefore, it follows that all humans have universal rational duties to one another. I said, rationality comes to the core, centering on their duty to respect the other's humanity. So, what we find is, to Kant, all humans must be seen as inherently worthy of respect and dignity. He argued that morality must stem from such duties, a duty based on deontological ethic. Consequences such as pain or pleasure are irrelevant, according to him. So, Kant also identifies certain duties as absolute. These are obligations to do certain types of actions, and he calls this general type of obligation a categorical imperative. That is, the action is imperative because it falls within a certain category. So he has three formulations of this categorical imperative. I will quote. First is that act only by that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it be a universal law. In other words, when working out what you should do, you must ask yourself what it would be okay if everyone took this type of action. So if this is one prescription by him. Second formulation is equally interesting. So act as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of any other, in every case as an end in itself, never as a means only. The other people should never be seen just as a means to an end. So this is a useful reminder to us for the present day. When we are not all, but in some quarters, we hear about sad stories about our, reactions to our doctors who get, contaminated by this pandemic. And we should show more sympathy, more accommodation. And that is why I'm bringing in, invoking Kantian theories. Uh, when this book, Good Medical Practice, was published, it was here you will find in that book for the first time the duty based guidelines were laid out, and this also says that the specific duties to behave only in certain sorts of ways with the patients during when they are ill or when they are facing pandemics. So from this Kantian uh, derivative, what I find is, let us examine how the French society was, responding to the pandemics taking place at that time. But before that, I would like to underline few things when writing history of the pandemics that I have given very briefly the limitations of our observations, how to interpret them. So the above observations which I made would very inadequately illustrate the enlargement in scope and sharpening of focus that history is a discipline which has been undergoing this in a continuous manner. The impulses under which historical interpretation has changed and the terrains of controversy have shifted clearly derived to a very large part from the fundamental alterations in social relationships in the modern era, on which I shall be speaking more on that. We are being forced to look at the past increasingly from angles different from those of our precursors. What features were formerly in the foreground now tend to recede, and what were there in the background, they are coming to the front. So the entire perspective of the painting is changing. So the other features are being redeemed from obscurity. We seek more and more of the history of the people, especially in the case of pandemics now, almost the same with the same enthusiasm with which we demand or uphold other subjects of history. All this is to the good, but a correct angle of vision does not by itself bring illumination. A historical interpretation consists of generalizations from endless complex events and resultant relationships. Therefore, to be authentic for the historian, it demands that exploration often enough could be repeated exploration of evidence and a continuous re-questioning of previous assumptions. Why I am saying this? Because when we come to the 19th century, there are changes in historical methodology also from Leopold von Ranke's prescription that the contemporary sources are those which are contemporary in terms of time. It should have linguistic rigor, and the theory of Caesar he is giving. He is telling by mid 19th century that these are, say how it was, but this is not possible because we cannot limit ourselves to total positivism. We will have to bring in interpretation. We will have to bring in the element of erudition of the scholar, how that develops with the accumulation of knowledge over a period of time, and this is how historiography has also changed. I would like to take the example of how our French historians, especially the annals schools, about whom time, space, death, and other things, health, and other things have been. They were the pioneers in exploring, but I was finding that somehow they were not so productive so far in the in the pandemics are concerned. But at the same time, we must give them credit, especially Laduri, Bradel, and others. Of course, in Mark Bloch, I could not find anything. He is totally based on reading the agrarian records. But these people did have some familiarity with the themes which are emerging, and they were considering them important. And they were writing about, and there are instances of their, grappling with the problem of pandemics also. I will take the example of Laduri's Montelio, The Promised Land of Error, which was published in 1975, the French edition, which was later translated into English, published in 1979. This chapter, this interesting book has a chapter, which chapter 14, which deals with death in Montello. Now, Montello goes into whatever little records are there. I will elaborate on that, and he is looking into the Inquisition register of Jacques Fournier. He was the bishop of Pamiers in Eric in the Comte de Foix. Forgive my pronunciation of French. I'm quite familiar with Dutch, not with so much with French, but I am, now it is located in southern France, and he has tried to study a very brief period, 1318 to 1325, even not 1348, and on the basis of this Jacques Fournier's register, who became Pope at Avignon under the name of Benedict XII, very famous person, he supervised, Benedict, let us go into the nature of the record and how he culled information from there. Benedict XII was quite rigorous and collection of data for the Inquisition in his diocese, and he saw to it that the depositions made to the Inquisition courts were meticulously recorded. This is, this is simply fantastic. Montpellier was the last village which actively supported the heretic sect Cathar, also known as Albigensianism, after the town of Albi, in which some of the heretics lived, and how they were dealt by Catholics. So the Inquisition court worked for 370 days. This is in all detail. Between 1388 to 1325, these 370 days included 578 interrogations. Of these, 418 were examinations of the accused and 160 examinations of witnesses. In all these hundreds of sessions dealt with 98 cases. The court set a record for the hard work in 1320 with 160 days of work. It worked 93 days in 1321, 55 days in 1323, 43 days in 1322, 42 days in 1322, 23, 42 days in 1324, and 22 days in 1325. Now, this, why I'm choosing this, because look at the application, the rigor with which those records are compiled, and why Laduri is concentrating on them. He believe, he's finding them authentic, and he's finding that the interrogations were written down in a register, 2 volumes of which have been lost, unfortunately. But nevertheless, these are known as Fournier register. However, it does not provide statistics on mortality. So how to make out that? Um, Laduri found that there are 25 cases of exiles. All 25 lived in Catalonia between 1308 and 1323, the limits of our information about them. Out of total 25, 9, that is 36%, died of some illness. A higher proportion might have been there as well. One died in a work accident, 8 were arrested, and of these 8, 2 died at the stake. Other 7 survived, but we do not know what became of them afterwards. If we concentrate on 12 people out of this group who came from Montpellier, 4 of them died of illness, 4 were arrested, 4 survived. But the rates and causes of mortality among the immigrants in Catalonia does not necessarily reflect the pattern among the people of Montpellier. Therefore, Laduri, when he used this source, he was conscious of that. So what he did was that he used the partial data relating to consolamentum, the Cathar ceremony administered to believers on their deathbeds. And from there, those records, he found 11 people were consoled, within quotes, hereticated on their deathbed. The register does not reveal whether between 1300 and 1320 people in Montpellier died of hunger, but it speaks only of exodus, not of death, as the consequence of food shortage. So there is a linkage. On the other hand, records do give evidence of epidemics. Several people died almost simultaneously in the same family, especially in the early 1300. As I said, that there sometimes these are silent, so there is no reference to these epidemics, but this can be gathered before 1348 plague, and even after 38 plague, because rural consciousness was gripped by the dread of contagion. That is why they were leaving the villages. Classification of illness was very elementary and based merely on the symptoms which affected different parts of the body, and even then, usually the external parts. So it was a matter of symptomatology rather than etiology. This is largely true of the entire 18th century. I will elaborate upon that also. So if we go by the dictionary meaning, then the vocabulary of insult which Laduri looked into, he looked into the dictionaries also, and he found that references to scrofula, fistulas of the thigh, ulcers, abscesses, the terminologies for these are there, and these are generally occur in large scale. Skin diseases were rife, included the itch, ringworm, scabies, leprosy, St. Anthony's fire. which could be treated at the sulfur baths at Axel Les Thames, where there was a sulfur fountain. In India also we hear about so many sulfur fountains, and we hear stories that leprosy patients, when they go there, they get treated. How far this is true, that has to be scientifically examined. What I'm trying to say is that, look here, this is a disease, and they are looking for a remedy, and how the society is reacting to that. The concept of pilgrimage occurs. This simple phenomenon of going for sulfur baths led to the pretext for a pilgrimage to Upper Erig, and then there are records of those pilgrimages. So it was not illness that mattered in Upper Eriga. That was only epiphenomenon. That was not the central phenomenon, epiphenomenon, subphenomenon. What mattered was death, that unadorned, without fine phrases, falling like executioner's knife, falling like an executioner's knife, without warning, at least without warning recorded by our witnesses. So these diseases leads to certain kinds of social activities, which are attended by people of the society. For example, whenever death occurs, even now you will find it is the women folk who were at that time, from Monthulo also, it is reported that they were organized in terms of domus system, which was prevalent there. They entailed ritual laments on the part of the daughters and daughters-in-law when their mother and mother-in-law was dead or dying, or even merely in danger. So the Mediterranean lamentu, the concept lamentu, is much older than this Catharism or even Christianity. That also reflects how that particular pre-Monthulo society was reacting to that. And in Monthulo, what we find is that it was structured by the damos, and so did not include the women of whole village as such. Few women would go and cry. Sometimes it reminds me of our practice of Rudalis in Rajasthan. Sometimes the women's wailing, which might of course be sincere, accompanied by the mere prospect of death. So mourning might be purely ritual. So a ritual is developing without tears or genuine with tears. In either case, mourning was expressed in socialized forms. Like other places, women watched over dying. They played a major role in preparing the dead for burial and in preserving the locks of hair, nail parings from the corpse. This is still happening. So this is how a major part of the society is engaged. I would say 50% of the society is engaged in this manner. Then it has an additional angle. It was also attended by a large crowd, and as happens with crowd, of course, the herding mentality is there, but it's an essential part of the crowd that they start gossiping about the event. So they will have varieties of narratives, which could be apocryphal, which could be true, which might have some substance of truthfulness. Illumination of the contrast between men and women, this was generally anti-feminist in nature, made death into a masculine affair. Even now, I don't know about us, in our society also, it is the male population which goes to the, funeral places, Shamshan Ghat or, Kabristan. So, so this offered an opportunity to remind people of rank who were buried in church in European context. Of course, this does not, no, I don't know. So far Europe is concerned, you will find even in India, if you visit the churches, you will find certain graves are there. You will not find the graves of common people. They are of high and mighty people. I have dealt with Dutch East India Company graves, so I found all the officers, high officials were buried in the within the precincts of within the church, and outside the herd were buried in the graveyard outside the walls, which was occasionally allowed to lie fallow to prepare space for further batches of death. And over and above the social structures surrounding death, there was the prime ordeal anguish which haunted the dying person as his nearest and dearest ones. This dread was not concerned so much with death in itself, as with salvation after life. This is I will not elaborate upon this. This is the sociological angle which occurs from this. Um, since I'm concentrating on the reaction of French society, because of the paucity of time, I don't know, Dr. Tanija would give me some time, some more time. What we find in the time of French Revolution also is that there are two kinds of broad debates. One is in favor of hospitals, in favor of beggars' houses, in favor of maintenance of hospitals. And the other hand, we find that the Bertrand Barre de Usac, he was a famous man because he was the man who presided over a trial that led to the execution of Louis XVI in January 1793. When he visits a place like this, he claimed, he shouted that no more poor houses, no more hospitals. This was one strand of debate. And since he was, presiding the execution of the king, so this was the hegemonic debate. This, uh, on the other hand, the poor house, the hospital, the prison, often combined into one all-purpose receptacle of social waste, a function that in some instances persisted into the next century, continued in the 19th century also. You will find 19th century. This debate continued. Now, the disease, with few exceptions, would be rendered obsolete by the omnipresence of health. This was the emerging idea that if more and more people are healthy, if they are fed well, the disease will recede. This kind of idea was generated by, as I said in the beginning, by the concept of rationality, because they argued that this was needed. What was needed was a rational system of government. The very necessity of medical practitioner outside the emergency ward was a confession of society's imperfection, unnecessary, and not to be tolerated in a rational democratic world. Now, this is pre-revolution. Another example I would cite is from the ancient regime is that around this time, what we find is the hospitals were uh, quite expensive affair. Now we are privatizing. We will face that kind of situation very soon. During that period, what we find is most patients were accommodated. Look at the ratio bed per person per bed. How many persons were there? Most patients were accommodated 4 or 6 to a bed, heads and feet alternating at the headboard. They were generally verminous, and mortality ranged from 15% to as high as 45%. So such abuses were copiously catalogued by critics of this kind of ideology. In 1772, and this gentleman I must refer to, Dr. Jean Emmanuel Gilibert, he was of the faculty at he was one of the faculty at Montpellier, who wrote the famous three-volume work Medical Anarchy, or Medicine Considered as an Evil in Society. Look at the title, how it is titled. Dr. Gilibert's criticism of the doctors at work has some modern, ring, because this is the nuts in nutshell. What was his I would say that his argument was that these doctors join forces to plunder the needy, ill, and after torturing them, share their prey. So this kind of debate was continuing, going on, and it continued during the revolution also. Here, I would like to say a few things about the other side of the debate, which in the forefront was Dr. Theodor Tronchin. He, he was a doctor, and he would often give such prescriptions that which would be very scandalous, but nevertheless he stuck to his guns. This eminent doctor would write the ritual prescription for what he knew was a placebo. He said that all these things are a placebo, but he would also lay down an accompanying regimen that was shockingly novel during his days. He would recommend eating fresh vegetables as part of a balanced diet and occasionally taking water instead of wine. He favored exercise and suggested that his middle class and middle aged patients take fencing, gymnastics, and horseback riding. He did his best to oppose the current fashion in towering, airtight wigs and tried to persuade the ladies to nurse their own children. He was an early exponent of a smallpox inoculation in France. Though his method was very crude, if ingenious, he would pass a thread through a pustule of a smallpox victim and allow it to dry. Then he would make a neat incision in the skin of the person to be inoculated and insert it in a tingy fragment a very tiny fragment of the contaminated thread. This technique, which was, and around this time, I must say that in India also, in Banaras, there are two Brahmins who are reported doing these kind of things, around, this is coincidence. The technique was, of course, was not liked by the elite of the society, so it was outlawed by the parliament. But after Louis XV died of the pox, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they had their entire family inoculated by this method of Dr. Tronchin, and Dr. Tronchin could assume his threading of pustules. Similarly, in other fields also you will find. I can go on narrating these kind of things. In France, what we find is that an epidemiological surveillance system was developed before the revolution. It called for reports to a central office of certain diseases, a staff of specialists, actually only 6 doctors, who would familiarize themselves with all the social and sanitary aspects of epidemics. These things are happening in the pre-anesthetic age, pre pre pre-septic stage, when antiseptics were not developed. So they were resorting to these kind of checks in order to restrain the epidemics. So a system of correspondence and public information was also developed. These were generally, because they did not have TV and other things, so these were generally read at mass, Sunday mass. And a training program also for public health doctors were conducted. Look at the society, how this is reacting to pandemics. And this organized epidemiological approach offered a brand new role for the doctor, a prophylactic mission not directed to the benefit of particular individuals with particular problems, Up till now, doctors were attending to particular individuals. Now they are not. They are addressing to others also. A total pictures of nations' lifestyle, sanitation, drinking water, eating habits, housing. These are the things they started, uh, concentrating on. So, from a private sympathetic physician, he was turning into or transforming into the doctor's role was transformed into a citizen-oriented doctor. These things are happening. Then I will not go into all those details. There were many great doctors. We should also remember that this is the time when um, between 1789 93, during the era of reform, we find that there were convictions. Doctors and scientists flocked to the banners of the revolution. We hear about Antoine Laurent Lavoisier, a founder of modern chemistry, who discovered the role of oxygen in combustion and served on the commission that established metering system. They also established a central, you know, um, what we call nowadays Begari committee, that was in which almost all the scientists were enrolled. Politicians were not. They were professional scientists. Physicists were there, mathematician, Lazare Carnot was there, Jean-Sylvain Bailly was there, he was an astronomer. So look at this French society, how it is reacting to pandemics, and how we are constructing their history from our whatever little information we have. And on the basis of that, and when I was reading yesterday the French records, the what I found interesting was the Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine. This term is a bad term now, but Guillotine was a humanist, and he was trying to suggest to the people that, as I said in the beginning, that death was coming unannounced. This gentleman suggested, he was a doctor, so he suggested that no, the convict should know that his time is, has come. So he tended to be very scornful of the Beggary Committee, although it had some, as I said, the brightest scientific luminaries in France. He said that, not being doctors, they busy themselves with the study of physics and amuse themselves with natural science, but usually this knowledge is imperfect, inadequate, and confined to themselves. Therefore, he concentrated on the devising systems of medical education and on political infighting. So from here you will find that Public Health Committee, appointed him as deputy, and there were other members also who were from medicine, like Vic de Azir, who drafted the comprehensive new plan of the French medicine. And this is how science, or medicine as a faculty started developing. This is also a contribution, of diseases, pandemics, and the approach of the society towards that. So how the various institutions started developing in the aftermath of these diseases and pandemics. This also is very eye-opening for us. In the modern world, we should also think in these terms. We should also have some rational approach, where every day we are hearing that somebody has discovered a medicine without going through the rigors of science. So those things, I think, they should be discouraged by our rulers as well as our people. I don't blame the rulers always, because they also follow the choice of their followers. So in France, you find this kind of development taking place. In the 21st century, and with this, I would, if I'm overshooting my time, that I would like to conclude that the famous philosopher Michel Foucault, and without whom a discussion should not be considered incomplete, not because he was a great philosopher, but because of his contributions. He wrote a book called The Birth of the Clinic. It was published in 1973, and I'm telling you from little information which I was narrating earlier, you will find that this book is, of course, a very brief book, a small book, but you will find how he has tried to interpret very limited information, but on the basis of, as I said in the beginning, limited, restricted speculation, and he has tried to understand the nature of evolution of disease, emergence of diseases and the reaction of the society those to these diseases. I cannot give all illustrations. This book is full of illustrations. I would recommend, if anybody is more interested, then please do read this book. But my point here is that he makes two observations which are very significant, because he says that there are two great myths of the French Revolution, of which I narrated in some detail. He says, I quote, the myth of a nationalized medical profession organized like the clergy and invested at the level of man's bodily health with powers similar to those exercised by the clergy over men's souls. And second, the myth of a total disappearance of disease in an untroubled, dispassionate society restored to its original state of health. These are the two very problematic observations he is making. Um, I would like to, I'm not inclined to go by that, because what he is considering as myths on the basis of historical facts don't appear to be myths to me, frankly speaking. There is a whole, this is why I was bringing this French example as a example for our participants. That look here, there is a society in which you are finding intellectual development is taking place, and with that intellectual development, you are finding that it is influencing various sections of society, of which medicine, practitioners of medicine was also one of them, and how they started evolving. If you read this records of French Revolution edited by Schwartz, I have access to the English version. You will find that how the Directorate and even the Reign of Terror and other things, how they were reacting to that, and how were they formulating policy. Even Robespierre supported this medical education. He's saying that no, for the larger interest of the people, it is required. And we must not forget, when we are assessing French Revolution, that it was one of the most popular revolution of that time. I don't find, after this Russian example and Chinese example, any reputation of that kind of revolution anywhere, where the larger masses, their concerns, their concepts, their approaches are coming to the center stage of policymakers. The assembly is taking note of that. They are passing resolutions from 1789 to 93. There are whole set of resolutions which are passed. How this hospitals will be financed. It is not that all the ecclesiastical lands were distributed among the peasants, as I said in the beginning. They were also distributed. They were also assigned to, not distributed, they were also assigned to various hospitals for the maintenance of those hospitals, where the common people could go and get treatment at minimum cost. Most of the cost was borne by the state through this indirectly. Yeah, so of course this was not a welfare state, but some kind of a welfare notion was there, that it is the people at large who should be taken care of. And when you contrast this with our modern times, you will find that same kind of debate is still going on. In all those, this is the when we come to this age, we must know, as I said in the beginning, that market is at the center. Death is not. Now the medicines are becoming very simple, easily made. Government has multiplied its production. Even then, from Bombay we heard about Mumbai, we heard about so many very very lamentable cases that they had to cough out more than 40,000 rupees for one capsule. So this is is happening during the time of pandemics. And when we try to write about history of pandemics, we will have to take into account the historical facts as well as the sociological of this history of medicine, how it is emerging over a period of time. With these few words, I think I have overshot my time. Dr. Tanuja, should I continue or should I stop here?
No, no, sir. The speakers are waiting, sir. The next speakers. We are really
Yeah.
privileged to hear from you, sir. A great scholar of history. He does not need any introduction, but I shall give a brief note of his biography. Professor KASM Ishrat Alam, sir, Professor of History, Professor of Center of Advanced Study, Department of History, Aligarh Muslim University. He has been ex-member, Secretary, Indian Council of Historical Research, and is also appointed member of Research Council of History of Science, Research Council of History of Science, Indian National Science Academy. He is also a member of School Board of School of Social Sciences, Hyderabad University. He is also a visiting professor of University of Calcutta and Nehru. He has written several books and research papers. He has also delivered presidential address and keynote addresses in several conferences and seminars. I am extremely humbled to have you, sir, with us. He has received Netherlands Government Reciprocal Fellowship also. It was very humbling to hear from you, sir. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. Thank you, sir, once again.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Now I would like to welcome Farhad Nasween, ma'am. Farhad Nasween, ma'am, has graduated from the Lady of Sri Ram College of University of Delhi. She completed her post-graduation and MPhil in history from the Aligarh Muslim University. Thereafter, she taught history at the IMA, Dehradun. She joined Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi in 1999 as a lecturer and is presently a professor of history at Jamia Millia Islamia. She completed her PhD while in service. She has presented papers in 43 national and international conferences and has delivered invited talks in 56 places of prestige like UGC, HRDC, HIPA, National Museum and Prasar Bharati, All India Radio, etc. Besides many articles and reviews, she has published 5 books entitled Kashful, Bhagvat, Gorakhpur, and so on and so forth. Her writings have been published by the Landscape Journal of Architecture, Sahitya Academy, Manohar Publications, Primus Publications, Rupa Publications, Sage Publication, and Bloomsbury Publication. She has worked as the publication reviewer for Pearson Publications. Now I welcome you, ma'am, to please deliver your speech.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tanuja, am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. Please tell me how much time do I have?
Ma'am, the time slot is actually of 30 minutes.
Okay, fine. So I have time till 3:30, is it?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay. So I don't think I would have enough time to talk about, body shaming, which I had planned to speak about.
Okay.
So I think I'll perhaps just speak about ageism as of now. And before I begin, I don't know whether Professor Ishrat Alam is still there or no, but I just wanted to say that it was a great pleasure and it was a matter of honor to listen to you, Ishrat Bhai. And I think it was an amazing talk that you gave about medicine. It was fantastic, absolutely. So I had thought that I'll speak to you about, body shaming and also ageism. So perhaps I'll just quickly run through body shaming since it's already listed in our program schedule. So body shaming is about, making somebody feel uncomfortable or making somebody feel bad about the way they look. That is what body shaming is about. And let me also clarify that this doesn't have anything to do with, if you resist body shaming, it doesn't have to do with, resisting the changes that you have to make, or maybe the effort that you have to make for betterment of your health. It doesn't have to do with health. It's more about how you look. So we find that in the late 1960s, there was a movement which started, which was known as the fat acceptance movement. Because being fat was something which was looked down upon straight away, and people were in a younger age, if they were fat, they were bullied about it and so on. So there was a consciousness that came with, of course, with development in medical science, where people realized that often the accumulation of fat in people's body has to do with some other medical condition. So all those things were taken into consideration. They were brought into, the knowledge of people at large, that they don't have to look down upon people for the way they look. Then we find that in 1969, there was a National Association for Advanced Acceptance of Fat. Then in 1996, there was a new term that came, which is known as body positive. So body positive as a term implied that everyone should have a positive image about their own body. And at the same time, the other people should also have a positive image about the way the others look. So there's no question of, looking down upon people for the way they look, because most of the time, you are not in control of the way you are looking. So that's something, it came to the fore. And then finally, in 2012, we have another huge slogan that entered, which was called "All Bodies Are Beautiful." So finally, you have this idea where there's a total acceptance, and this acceptance is not about just others accepting you. It's also about you accepting yourself, because many a times what we find is that there is no acceptance of oneself. So that is also very, very important. So what are the things that body shaming triggers off? So it may trigger off, eating disorders, what is known as the anorexia. It may trigger off self-hate. It may trigger off low self-esteem issues. It may trigger off depression. It may trigger off, suicidal tendencies. So next time when you meet somebody, or if you're walking down a corridor and you casually say to somebody that you've lost weight, you put on weight, you're looking tired, your hair is turned white, or whatever, refrain. There is no need to comment on people's physical appearances, because you don't know what is the importance of those physical appearances for them, how sensitive they are about it. So you may have said something because you wanted to trouble someone, or you may have just said something casually. So you don't know how the other person feels about it. So therefore you have to be very careful in what you say to other people, because the ownership of a body is that of the soul that resides in that body. And it is really nobody's entitlement to say anything about that body to that soul, because what you're saying is not being registered actually by the body. It's being registered by the soul. It's being registered by that faculty in our mind which makes us alive. So we don't have to kind of get into a space, knowingly or unknowingly, where either we trouble somebody or we get troubled by what other people have to say about us. Now, therefore, this kind of takes me to the idea that we need to love the way we are. We may not be perfect, and the other thing to remember is that we have not taken the the responsibility to be perfect. We have not taken up the responsibility to be looking beautiful all the time. So we must remember that we have not taken up any of these responsibilities. And the other important thing in this regard is, again, the gender issue, where you find that women are under extreme pressure to look beautiful and good at all times, while men may not be under so much of pressure to look good at all times. So I think we need to understand that there is a gender angle in this as well. And then we need to understand, that we may do things for our physical, well-being, which means maybe exercising, maybe losing weight, maybe doing a couple of other things, but not for somebody else. You need to understand that you're entitled to take care of your body because it's going to make you feel good, but not because you want approval from somebody. Because once you start doing things for approval, then there is no end to it. I mean, you may do n number of things and you may really tire and exhaust yourself, and still you may not find the approval, because if someone's decided to disapprove of you, they'll still disapprove of you. So I think that is something that we need to be very careful about. And then we would find that body shaming also works through media sources. because for the media and for the people who are making products which make you look beautiful, supposedly, it's a business for them. So we need to be conscious that we are dealing with businessmen. When we open the media and it tells us that if you don't have a skin of a certain kind, if you don't have a hair of a certain kind, then you're not beautiful enough. So we need to kind of be careful of that, and also understand that a lot of beautiful images that we see are all made up images. They are there, you know, there are apps which make you look beautiful. There are lighting, there is camera, there are professionals who work just for this. So don't make any ideal for yourself which is unrealistic, and you know, kind of be confident about yourself. So that is body shaming. What is body shaming about? The other thing that I wanted to speak about to you today was ageism. Now, ageism is something which is, you know, this is a prejudice or a discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. And ageism typically is like racism or sexism. So it is also a process of discrimination. So it's a process of discrimination. It's a process of prejudice. It's a process that makes you feel you know, the other. It distances you. So that is something that happens. And within ageism, the people who profess, you know, that they discriminate on the grounds of age, then they stereotype a given age with a certain thing. So there is a stereotyping of people of a certain age. Now, how does this work? You know, it works differently while you are in different age group. So when we talk about ageism, it isn't as if it is only the old people who are being discriminated against on the basis of age. It's also the younger people who might be discriminated against on the basis of their age. So say, supposing you're traveling in a public transport, and you have your little child who's sitting next to you, there'll be people who will come and say कि इसको आप अपनी गोदी में बिठा लीजिए, हम इसको अपनी गोदी में बिठा लेते हैं, भैया तुम क्यों बिठा लोगे, या हम क्यों बिठा लें? Because every child also has a personal space. So many times you would find that the personal body space of a small child is violated because he or she is a small child. So that is one thing. The other thing is, while children are talking to you, or they're talking to your parents, to their parents and so on, you'd find that people do not pay enough attention to them. The kind of attention that is required, that is not paid to them. If there is someone who's elder to them, who barges into this conversation, then the child is kind of, you know, just left blabbering, and the parent pays attention to what the more elder person is saying. And then, you know, when I go to the markets, I see so many times the kids are asking for stuff, you know, asking their mothers to buy something for them, and they just snub. You know, so this kind of disrespect, it's disrespect. And how do we, you know, think that respect is the monopoly of only the elders? No, respect is not the monopoly of only the elders. Just because somebody was born a couple of years before, it doesn't entitle him to, you know, respect by virtue of just that. I will come to more, you know, more issues, but yeah, we need to understand that often we find that children and people of young age, people who are dependent on their parents, they are disrespected. So that is something that we need to understand at that age. Then if you grow older, for say somebody, you know, I find that people who are in their 40s, 50s were just entering into this age. And especially when I myself started entering into this age, I realized that I started noticing a lot of things, you know. There was one thing that I noticed was that often people use the term called auntie, uncle. They're not used to refer to you as their auntie or uncle, but actually there are terms which kind of, you know, they use like abuses. Like there was a girl who was hardly maybe 20 years of age, and there were a couple of goons, you know, who called her a auntie, and she was so angry about it that she got the matter reported to the disciplinary committee, and it became a huge issue, you know. So the idea of giving people, you know, a tag. So you call them by a tag because you assume their age, because they look in a certain way. So you assume something, and then you would pin it on that. So that is something, again, it's a very subtle, it's a very silent ageist attitude, which again needs to be kind of, you know, checked. I'll just give you a quick example. I was dealing with somebody recently, and if you're familiar with Hindi, that fellow, he called me Chachi. Now Chachi means the wife of my uncle. I was really angry with him, and really angry because I felt that, for heaven's sake, you don't know whether even I'm married or I'm not married. Forget about being your chachi, you know. So these kind of things one will encounter, one does encounter. And so we need to be kind of, take the lighter side of it. That is, I think, important, to take the lighter side of it. And the other thing is that if you are someone who's doing this, one is that if I'm receiving it, then I have to understand how I need to handle this. And the other is that there'll be always people who will be elder to you, and the other thing that we must remember is that we are also standing in the line to reach where they have already reached, you see, because we are looking forward to live. No one's looking forward to, be packed off from this world. So if you're looking forward to live, then you have to look forward to getting old as well. So why not respect the people who are already there? Because then you generate a system, then you generate a society that respects people who are of a certain age, and it respects people in every age, and it is sensitive to the insecurities of people who are in any given age. So that is something which becomes very important. Now, in a workplace, typically, the researchers say that in a workplace, people think that the old have had their turn, unka ho gaya, they should, step aside. They should act their age. They should not steal identities. So if you have an older woman dressing up in a certain way, it becomes a case of stealing the identity of a younger woman. My God, this is not like this. This is about making a choice. Just like you may have somebody who is very young, who decides to dress up in a certain way, or you have someone very old who decides to dress up in a certain way. For heaven's sake, just let them be. Don't attach styles to the age of a person, you see, because what should be given precedence is independence. Now, this is about personal independence. This is about the independence to make a choice. So that independence, the society should not steal by attaching stereotypes to a age. That becomes very, very important. And this auntie and uncle comment that I was talking about, so this auntie comment has a lot to do with a woman being menopausal. Now that, again, it's a very interesting thing, because you see, if you look at the, the value of a woman, so her fertility has always been a very important thing for a male-dominated society. And callings, because when this term is used, it doesn't just use, in a physical term, but it also has a number of other implications, which the person who says also may not realize. So we need to be very, very careful. The other interesting thing is that we are living in a time space where you find that there is an obsession with youth. There is an obsession with looking young, you see. And this looking young is an industry. And it is an industry which can be calculated to be somewhere around 250 to $300 billion. It's a $250 to $300 billion industry, which tells you that you do not have to become old. Okay, so you are fighting against time, and time is one thing against which you can never ever win, because if you could win, then all the big wigs that we were just talking about a little while ago, Professor Ishrat Alam was mentioning the great rulers of the French dynasty, Louis the 15th, 16th. I'm sure they wouldn't have died, and I'm sure that nobody would have aged. I mean, we would have still had Mumtaz Mahal sitting beautifully somewhere. So that is not going to happen. Doesn't happen. So this is an industry. So it says the industry professes that you must worship youth, that you must worship the young, and try to be one. Well, that's not going to happen. So the other thing that happens is, when you are obsessed with youth, is that you start looking down upon the aged. Now, once you start looking down upon the aged, you have entered into a vicious circle. ये जो है, ये एक गोला है, जहाँ पे घूम फिर के आप फिर वहीं पे वापस पहुँचेंगे, और वो आप ऐसे वापस पहुँचेंगे, because a generation that ridicules the old is a generation which ridicules its own future. Okay, so as a young person, if you're looking down upon white hair, you're looking down upon wrinkles, you're looking down upon laughter lines, you're looking down upon broken teeth, then eventually a day will come when you go into the mirror and you'll find that you have all of them. So you look down upon yourself. However, when as a young person, you learn, to respect everything that comes with aging, then when you yourself age, you won't be hating yourself. at least you will, you will at least go and have a look in the mirror, because you will not be so scared of the mirror, of having a look at yourself for what you've become. And you are going to eventually become if you live. So that is a very important thing. Then we find, that there is this whole idea of having an ideal. So in the film industry, especially in Hindustan, we have a Bollywood ideal where you have a perfect mother. So there is this idea of the mother India who's a perfect mother, who's an ideal, or might be there is a ideal of a perfect child. So when you have this ideal in the image of a self-sacrificing mother, you somehow feel, if you see a woman who is, in her 50s, 60s, and she doesn't dress up like that stereotype Mother India that you had seen somewhere, or the image that you have in your mind, then you feel that there's something wrong with her. No, it isn't, because that image is actually a hyperbole. The image which was projected on the screen was a part of a story. It was part of a narrative which was there on the screen for 3 hours, and it's gone. And the people whom you deal with in your real life are real people. So don't expect perfection, don't expect, I would say, an ideal kind of image of people in real life, whether it is a mother, whether it's a father, or whether it's children, whether it's teenagers. No, it doesn't exist, So there are always shades of gray, and we need to understand that we are dealing with shades of gray. The other thing is that ageism is something that people don't talk about. It's not something which is widely understood. It's not widely spoken about. So we need to create awareness about it, and awareness about not just in the young people, but also in the old people. So we need to, because they should also be conscious about how they deal with their aging and how others deal with their aging. Then we find that if you are, you believe in ageism as a phenomenon, and you think that you can get away with discriminating against people, then again, it's self-defeating. In this also, there is a gender play, because if you have an older woman marrying a much younger boy, then there is a lot of hue and cry. Like we saw recently in the case of Priyanka Chopra, when she married, then there was a lot of hue and cry. And there is a constant trail on the kind of clothes that she wears. We have n number of people within the film industry who married women who are much younger to them, but there is no hue and cry about them. There are no jokes and memes being made about them, which they were made for this woman because she dared to marry somebody who was much younger than herself. Now there was a data collection of Facebook groups. So it was found that approximately 84% people talk about the older people. About 75% of them criticize the older people in some way. About 40% of them think that the old people should be excluded from the mainstream of life. It is noticeable if you're driving on the road and if you have someone older in front of you driving slow, then people get really, kind of very impatient, and they feel that, oh God, these guys should not be allowed to drive. Inka to matlab driving license le lena chahiye. Or maybe you find somebody who's shopping in a mall and you have an older person standing in the line in front of you, and he or she takes their own time to open their purse, count the money, and then give it, and you say, oh God, these guys should not be allowed into a mall at all. So this is exclusion. So there is a lot of, feeling of resentment when you find that these guys should be just pushed out of, the social scenario. Now, see, the formula for being young forever is dying early. Like I said to you earlier, nobody wants to use that formula. The other thing that we must understand, that karma is inescapable. So whatever is the standard of treatment of old that a society sets, whatever is that level that the youth is going to set, that youth is going to, actually live through that threshold itself. So they're not setting that example for anybody else, but they're setting it for future. That's one thing. The other thing is that as people who pass through, and we as human beings, we go through different ages, and we go through insecurities and issues of different ages. So we need to chart a course for ourselves. So the chart, the chart which has to be kind of devised, no matter which age you are, whether you are a teenager, whether you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever you are, we need to understand one thing, that see, happiness is an unsolvable equation. No one has ever been able to be completely happy at all times forever and ever. That doesn't exist. So what is happiness then? And happiness is not, a rain that बारिश हो रही है खुशी की और आप गए उसमें जाके खड़े हो गए, that that happiness is raining and you go and stand there and you get all drenched and then you remain drenched and you remain wet with happiness for the rest of your life. That is not happening. So happiness has to do with action. What is the action that you're going to take to make yourself happy? So once we get into this, that you have to take action to make yourself happy, then we come to this idea that you are in charge of your happiness. So you cannot give the charge of your happiness to anybody else. You see, as a teenager, you can't give it to your parents. As a parent, you can't give it to your children. As you know, as someone who's a senior faculty in any place where you are tutoring, or you're working in any other governmental organization, or you're working in one of the MNCs, have a lot of inflow of young energy all the time, but it doesn't mean that you're going to give them the command to decide whether you have a right to be of a certain type. So don't let them decide what type you are going to be. There are a lot of professions which also have a lot of stereotyping, that a particular profession will have a certain kind of dressing. You must also understand that you are in a particular profession only for some time in your life, and you are in that profession for a major time of your life. So you need to understand that you have to live your life within those years. So do whatever you want to do. I mean, you don't have to be tied down by what the stereotyping tells you. Now, in the end of this, I want to come to this amazing story from Premchand, which is called the Budi Kaki, because this is about really old people who cannot help themselves. And when Premchand starts with this story, he begins with this classic line that old age is a recurrence of childhood. This is the first line of that story, that old age is a recurrence of childhood. And he's talking about someone who's really old, someone who's lost completely all her faculties. The only thing that she thinks about and she's interested in is eating. So that is the only faculty that remains. And this woman is called the Budi Kaki. And she stays with her nephew, jisko she had given all her property. And her nephew and his wife, they usually ill-treat her. And as we noted earlier, that the children will copy whatever their parents do. So that because the children saw that she was being ill-treated by their parents, the sons of the family also ill-treated the Budi Kaki. So somebody would just go and throw water on her. Somebody would just go and kind of pull her sari and run away. And she used to get very annoyed. And the other thing that used to happen with her was that she would start crying loudly like a child. So it was stereotyped that Budi Kaki, she just, you at the drop of a hat, she will just start crying. And I think emotional sensitivity and the tendency to start crying is definitely related with old age, because I've seen a lot of people who become extremely sentimental and very, very vulnerable once they become physically weak. In fact, it has to do with physical weakness. It doesn't even have to do so much with old age, but with physical weakness. So we find, that there was a wedding in the family and a lot of guests had come, and all that the Budi Kaki could think about was that when is she going to get pudis to eat? She wanted to have pudis, and nobody offered her. So she came out herself and she wanted to go and eat, from where the pudi was being made. So she went there, and this daughter-in-law of hers, whose name is Rupa, she scolded her and she said that you are like a dog. And then she also said to her that you want to be worshipped even before the gods. You so, hung upon eating. And she sent her back to her room. Then this woman cannot hold herself, the Kaki, and she comes out again. And this time her nephew is there. People were eating. There was a huge dinner which was being served, and the whole village had come to eat on this occasion. And then he drags her back to her room and he dumps her there. And she faints. And finally, when she becomes conscious late in the night, and when she comes to, she realizes that there is complete silence. It's the dead of the night. Everyone's already eaten. The party is over. So she comes out of her room and she goes to the courtyard, and there were leftovers which were lying on the floor. And there were dogs which were eating the leftovers, and the Budi Kaki starts eating from those leftovers. And at this point in time, this woman, Rupa, she gets up and she sees her mother-in-law eating from the leftovers on the ground. And as Premchand writes it, that for a Hindu Brahman, it was like watching a cow being slaughtered. She was so shocked and she was so scared and she was so ashamed of herself that she immediately brought food for the Kaki and she gave it to her. And then it's beautifully stated that just as children forgive very quickly, Budi Kaki forgave her daughter-in-law. But when we think of the Budi Kaki and the story of Premchand, and if you look at what's happening around us, we find, that the government had to actually pass a law in 2007 to kind of, remind people that they have to take care of their parents. It's known as the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. What a shame that people who brought you up, the government has to make a law to remind you that you have to take care of them. The story of the Budi Kaki is the everyday story of a number of old people who are really old, living in even rich houses. You forget about the poor classes who actually don't have anything much to eat and share with anybody. But even of the richer people, I mean, for the richer people, it would mean, that a soup which is prepared for an old woman, which is prescribed by a doctor, kept in the refrigerator for 15 days, reheated and re-given to her over and over again. And she has to drink that nonsense. That is one example. The other example is that if you're someone who's at a great position, you feel ashamed of your parents. You think that your parents, it's your duty as parents to come out and impress your bosses. No, not at all. Your parents are not responsible for impressing your bosses, god damn it. No, they aren't. So you have to understand, and then you have to be actually very watchful about it. Because often when I've been speaking about body shaming, and I talked about ageism, and I said that there is a gender-based angle in this, but as far as the treatment of the older women or older men in a household is concerned, a lot of discrimination and a lot of, I would say, oppression comes from women themselves. So if you, because for the women who are younger and who have a charge of a household, in their mind, they feel challenged by an older persona in the house who might have been in charge of this household, a decade ago. So they feel threatened. I don't know why. In their heads, they feel threatened. So if you think of Budi Kaki, where this woman didn't give her the pudis, you will have women in modern households, in rich families, who will hold on to the roti ka dabba at their end of the table and pass on one roti to people to eat. You need to be conscious of this. If you are that person, then you have to stop. If it's happening in your family and you notice it, you have to stop. If you notice it in your neighborhood or anywhere, please intervene, because it is time that we intervene. While we, as a comparatively younger generation, we might act like servants of the people who come to our house. We act like servants of people jinse hamara koi kaam hai. But do we really take care of the people who brought us up? The people who really need our help. And in this context, we must remember that time is, is a very powerful thing. And you cannot compete with it, and you'll never win. As far as, if you're competing with time, you're racing with time, you're never going to win. So the best is that you take a stock of it and you understand how time works and how karma works. And if you're conscious of these things, if you're conscious of the idea of morality, merits, the idea of, investing in your own future, if you're thinking of investing in your own future as someone who's young, then you have to invest in the well-being of the older people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your insights and views on this very relevant topic, which each and every people, I suppose, in the society faces sometime. I also thank you for joining in and just making this session a lighter one. Now we will have to go for the interactive session. As there are large number of participants, we cannot allow all the participants in the interactive session. I will select 2 best questions from the comment section, and I would request you, ma'am, to please answer these questions. The first one is, one of the participants, she is asking, her name is Romi, that if aging changes body, and how does the body shaming affect a person, and how to handle it in the best possible way?
Okay, all right. See, the thing is that you need to understand that you should be happy about, say, if you are aging, right? And if your body is changing in a certain way, then you need to first understand that you are lucky to be aging, because everyone in this world does not get an opportunity to age. So first you have to be happy about that instead of cribbing about it. And the other thing is that you have to be very confident about yourself. You have to be sure that whatever you do is not for looking of approval of other people. So, you have to be very careful about that. Now, in this context, it also becomes very important that you take as much of physical care of yourself as you can, and also take care of your mental health. Now, within this, we must remember this also, because mental health is another issue which is largely neglected. So if there are people, it is said that in everyone's life, there are some black holes. Black holes वो होते हैं जो आपकी पूरी energy को suck कर लेते हैं. So identify those black holes. And if you have any black holes in your life, then please move away from them. And the other thing is that there might be sometimes such black holes in your life that you can't get rid of. You might be having a difficult spouse, you might be having difficult siblings. Then the only idea is avoid confrontation and avoid anything which makes you stressed out. And if anyone has anything negative to say, they have a right to their opinion. It's as simple as that. They have a right to their opinion, and their opinion doesn't mean that it is going to become your opinion. And then in this context, you also have to be very, very selfish. I mean, you should have no time to spare for people who want to run you down. आपको पता है कि जो अर्जुन जो है वो कितने जबरदस्त तीर अंदाज थे. तो अर्जुन जो है जब वो कमान उठाते थे और जब वो तीर उसमें लगाते थे, तो उनको अपना जो निशाना था उसके अलावा और कुछ नहीं दिखता. अगर चिड़िया की आंख पे निशाना लगाना है तो उनको चिड़िया के फेदर्स भी नहीं दिखते थे, पेड़ भी नहीं दिखता था, हवा चल रही है ये भी नहीं दिखता था. So I think there has to be that kind of a complete focus that I'm going to be self-centered on my own well-being. And everything that makes you happy, you have to pursue it with a bit of selfishness. Because if you are not happy, you cannot make anyone else happy around you. If you're thinking कि मैं as a माँ मैं दुखी रहूंगी और मैं अपने बच्चे को खुश रख लूंगी, तो वो नहीं होने वाला है. You have to be happy first. Only then you can keep your child happy. Only then you can keep anyone else happy.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer. The next question is, ma'am, one of the participants, her name is Manisha. She is asking that if a person has put on body weight, how can one handle this situation if a person is body shamed?
Okay, fine. See, the first thing is that as far as body weight is concerned, you must kind of check out on it that what is the reason for the body weight, because there might be a medical condition because of which you may have put on body weight, and there is also the susceptibility of putting on weight. Some people are just more susceptible to putting on weight. That is also a possibility. That may not be a medical condition, or it might also be related to the eating habit that you may have inherited from people in your family, because families also have a eating pattern. कि कुछ घरों में जो है वो बहुत घी तेल का सामान पकता है, तो you will find कि उनके पूरे घर में everyone is going to be overweight. So that is one thing. So पहले तो आपने medical condition अपनी verify कर ली कि वो क्या है, और उसके बाद you must have a regimen for yourself. You must have a regimen of a diet for yourself, and you must kind of you have to stick to that. You must, and for exercising, I have seen in my own life that if you have a very grand plan कि मेरा जो है ये exercising मैं यूं करूँगी और मैं weight लाऊंगी और weights जो वाले उठाने वाले weights होते हैं, तो वो सब कुछ नहीं हो नहीं पाता है. ठीक है. So do whatever little you can do. And if you're fond of dancing and songs, then nothing like it. I mean, you're really lucky then. You can always dance your weight off. That is a possibility. Then the other thing is, that you can take out a kapda, जो kapda हो, जो आपका पहले का पहना हुआ, maybe 5 साल पहले अगर आपका जितना weight था, आप उस पे जाना चाहते हैं, because usually जो cardiologist होते हैं, वो आपका weight पूछते हैं जो आपका 25 years में weight था, and they say that is your ideal weight, because usually people offshoot from that weight a lot. So if you have a cloth which is older and you want to fit into that, then that is a parameter जिसके साथ आप नाप सकते हैं. और दूसरी एक बात ये है कि अगर आपको खुद लगता है कि I am not feeling comfortable, I look too fat and I myself don't feel so good about it, and physically if you cannot help it, then there are other techniques for it. So for example, if you wear darker colors, you are going to look thinner. So what are the designs which suit some people who are overweight? So then you have to even use those tools, but use those tools for yourself, for your happiness, not for anybody else's happiness. किसी और के लिए तो जिंदगी में जगह ही नहीं है, time ही कहाँ है, जिंदगी, life is so short. There's no time to please anybody.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer, and it was a pleasure having you with us and sharing your insights on this topic. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again for joining in.
Thank you so much.
Now I would like to welcome the next speaker, Hirany Mishra. She is presently working as an assistant professor law at Madhusudan Law College, Utkal University, Odisha. She has previously worked as assistant professor in National Law University, Odisha. Her research interest includes constitutional law, human rights law, access to justice. She works for clinical legal education and street lawyering for community members through legal aid services. She has contributed articles to journals and participated in various national and international conferences, seminars relating to socio-economic rights, gender justice, biodiversity laws, etc. Welcome, ma'am.
To everyone present, dear participants and the organizers. I feel extremely privileged to be part of this global lecture series to present on the topic gender justice during and post COVID-19 pandemic. To start off with the idea about gender justice, I get reminded about the quote of the famous philosopher John Rawls. He said that justice is the first virtue of any social institution, like truth is that of system thoughts. So, attainment of justice is not just that we strive for at an individual level, but it should also be on one of the major concern for a societal level or for any social institution. The agenda for today's discussion will be covering up why the topic of gender justice today has become so much relevant, especially during in cases of this global pandemic, by understanding what essentially gender justice means. Like the concept of gender justice can include to mean a wider range of issues, like including rights of LGBT community rights, the rights of the homosexuals, even the rights of men. But for the purpose of discussion today, I will be only including gender justice from the perspective of rights of women, and that we can just say that it will interchangeably use with that of women justice. The next, I will be touching upon the challenges faced by women during this global pandemic and the legal protections that are being afforded to them, and access to justice. What are the challenges for access to justice for women, and way forward and the challenges ahead after this global pandemic. Now, why there is a need for discussion relating to gender justice? Everyone can have this question in mind. So, 2020 marks the year where we celebrate the 25 years of adoption of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and 20 years since UN Security Council on Women, Peace and Security. Now, this pandemic has escalated the threats to access to justice, which were already there, and challenges to justice system, how there will be delivery of justice to the woman during this pandemic, because there are growing cases of injustices all around and human rights violation. If we see, flip up the newspaper or browse the internet, we find that, okay, there is rise in domestic violence cases, women don't have access to reproductive rights. So all these challenges are coming up, adding to already existing challenges of attaining gender justice, which were there. Now, let's come to the idea about what essentially justice is. Like, how many of we know that what justice actually means? Can we define what is justice? So, justice is a very abstract notion. We can't have a proper definition of what actually justice is. We have to understand it in context of what is injustice. Now, famous philosopher John Rawls has said that justice is fairness. If we treat something as fair, then that becomes justice. For that, he gives two principles. First is fair equality of opportunity, which talks about that there is fairness in access to resources, that everyone has equal access to the resources, and that becomes the fair distribution. The second is that of difference principle. What Rawls says is that sometimes you can say injustice can also be justified. Now, when can that be? that can only be justified when inequalities are for the least favored, or we can say the vulnerable people in the society. For that, we can have injustices can be justified. Now, he gives example of a division of a cake. He says that, for example, if a boy in a birthday party is said to cut the whole cake into pieces, but he cannot choose the pieces that he will have. He will cut the slice, obviously, in such a manner that it will be equal size, because he is himself fearing that he may have a small size, which he obviously doesn't want. So this will lead to fairness in distribution of the good that was available, which will ultimately, he terms as distributive justice. Amartya Sen also builds up this idea of justice. He says that justice is based on freedom. What Amartya Sen says is that justice is not just about the means of the freedom. Anyone can have access to resources. Even after having access to resources, the extent of freedom that individual is able to exercise on the basis of his capacity, that is also very important, which he calls as capability approach. He says that what matters is not the access to primary goods, but the extent of capability of resources which a person or an individual can add as a value addition. The very good example can be taken during this digital divide, during the pandemic. Like, few people may have equal access to resources, no doubt. Those set of groups of people may have equal resources, but then they can't use or do best use of that resource because of digital divide. The few groups will be left behind because they don't have access to, for example, web or internet. For that, they can't use the optimum level till which they could have used their resources. So this will also lead to what is called as injustice. Now, coming to the what is called as gender justice meaning. Gender justice, if we define, it is the ending of or the provision for redress of inequality between men and women, which basically results in subordination of women to men. Now, there are two aspects of gender justice when we are talking about gender justice as an outcome, which talks about access to and control over resources and end in inequality and discrimination. The other is about the process. How to reach the outcome, there is a process that has to be followed. So during that process, there has to be accountability, there has to be transparency of the social institution those who are engaged, so that the not only we attain the gender justice, but the process in which the gender justice is attained, that also has to be just. This concept of gender justice is primarily based on the concept of human rights. Now, what are human rights essentially? These are the basic inalienable rights which every human being inherent by the virtue of being a human being. So these rights are available to every individual regardless of race, sex, nationality, religion, language, ethnicity. There is no bar. These rights are equally applicable to everyone. Therefore, they are also called as universal rights. And these are inalienable rights. These rights cannot be separated from individual being. These rights are indivisible. There is no hierarchy of rights. That these are the more priority-based rights, and these are less priority-based rights. Then we have these rights are independent. Independent in the sense that, interdependent. Interdependent, that they are related with each other. Now, various international conventions like Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, ICSCR 1966, all the talk about that there shall be prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex. Now, we have a specific convention relating to women rights, that is the Convention on Elimination on All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1979. Now, the importance of this convention is that this convention is not only applicable to the private act, not only applicable to the state actors, but also to the private actors. The Convention on Rights of Child, the Convention on Protection of Rights of all migrant workers and members of the family, they also talks about there shall be prohibition based on the sex. The Convention of persons with disability, and the Convention Against Torture also extensively deals with provisions relating to gender justice, where it addresses the issues of like violence against women and girls. If we look into our own Indian Constitution, we find that gender equality forms the bedrock of our constitution. We find that starting from the preamble to so many enumerated articles under the fundamental right chapter, we also have the directive principles of state policy, and we also have fundamental duties, which extensively talks about that gender equality or gender justice should be attained. To name few, Article 14, which has equality before law and equal protection of the law. Article 15, Clause 1, talks about prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex. Article 15, Clause 3, talks about special provisions for women. So our constitution guarantees not only formal equality, where there shall not be discrimination on the basis of sex, but it also says that about substantive equality, which is about protective discrimination. What is protective discrimination? That the constitution gives special provisions for all those who are backward, so that they come forward with the main line and the justices being attained. Now we look into the Sabrimala Judgment or the Triple Talaq Judgment, which was being pronounced by the Supreme Court recently. All these were based on the theme of the gender justice. Like to quote few, the Supreme Court stated that to treat a woman as a lesser children of God is blinking at the Constitution. Dignity of women is an unwavering nature of fundamental rights. The importance of dignity of women, of every individual, has to be upheld, whether it is men or whether it is women, and these rights cannot be taken away from them. Then, like the other provisions include like Article 23, which talks about prohibition of trafficking and forced labor, Article 39A and Article 39D, which talks about right to adequate means of livelihood, equal pay for equal work. We also have fundamental duty, that is Article 51AE, which talks about that to renounce derogatory practices relating to which denounce the dignity of the woman. Now, coming to what are the challenges which are faced by the women during this pandemic, recently the United Nations Women has come up with a report like Justice for Women Amidst COVID-19, and that UN report has stated that what are the challenges faced by women, to list few. Like first is the cases of domestic violence, the other is curtailed access to institutions, access to justice institution, restricted access to reproductive health care and rights. We have digital divide, growing injustice for workers, and repercussions on forcibly displaced women and those deprived of their liberty. Now, coming to the specific law relating to domestic violence and the legal framework relating to that, like recently many of us have must have read a piece of newspaper article which was published in The Hindu, that the domestic violence cases have surged to a 10-year high during this global pandemic. So we can imagine that how much is the rate of domestic violence cases which are arising during this pandemic, and we must remember that many of the cases goes unreported. So that is also one of the major concerns. So if we come to the legal framework, we see that the Indian Penal Code provides for punishment under section 498A. The punishment is 3 years imprisonment, and the accused shall also be liable to fine. This is a non-bailable offense. That means bail is not a matter of right. Means the accused cannot claim that bail should be a matter of right, and it is the discretion of the court that whether the accused will be given bail or not. Then this offense is also cognizable offense. What is cognizable offense? That the police can arrest the accused even without a warrant. The cases of domestic violence are non-compoundable. That means it cannot be compromised between the woman or the victim and the accused person. Apart from that, there are Protection of Domestic Violence Act 2005, which talks about specific details about domestic violence and the laws relating to that. It talks about appointment of protection officer. Now, court will appoint protection officer for all those who are affected with domestic violence. The role of the protection officer is that the protection officer essentially assists the court. The protection officer will go and look personally that whether the women, those who are there, they have any problem or not. The protection officer will visit their home. The protection officer will arrange shelter home for the victims. The protection officers will also go and look for what interim measures can be provided. Uh, and suppose if there is any healthcare benefit or medical examination that has to be done, the protection officer will also do that. Now, the Domestic Violence Act also talks about monetary relief and compensation. The court can grant compensation to the victims of domestic violence. The court can also pass interim orders. What are interim orders? For example, if a case has not been finally disposed of, like the court can pass an interim order or to provide immediate relief to the victim so that the concern of that victim is being addressed there. Now coming to the judgments, we find that the Delhi High Court has given very significant judgment relating to domestic violence. All India Council for Human Rights, Liberty, Justice versus Union of India. The Delhi High Court has said that the domestic violence cases have increased manifold during the lockdown, so arising from the COVID-19. So for that, the Delhi High Court have made various guidelines. Like, for example, there must be due appointment of protection officers. The protection officers must be appointed, and this must be taken at a priority basis. Then helpline numbers which were not functional during this COVID crisis, we find that many helpline numbers are not functional. So what the court said is that these helpline numbers must be functional, and there will be introduction to WhatsApp chat room. This is especially for counseling of the women, where women find a forum where they can talk about what is their problem, what is their solution, and authorities will be counseling them. Now, another important judgment is Sham Kishore versus State, which was given in 2020 only. That the Delhi High Court said that the person accused of domestic violence can only be granted bail when adequate protection of the person or the woman who is a witness is being given under the witness protection scheme. That means if adequate protection to the woman is not given under witness protection scheme, the accused cannot be granted bail. I think this is a very, very important and significant decision that has been given by the Honorable Delhi High Court. The other aspect is about access to justice. Now, access to justice becomes the most challenging aspect today during the COVID-19 crisis. What is access to justice then? It refers to the ability of the people to seek and access remedy for the grievances from informal and formal institutions according to their need. Now, the percentage of reported legal issues for women is especially higher than that of men. Why so? Because in cases relating to social and family welfare areas like domestic violence, child custody, divorce, and right to alimony, the cases are more relating to women. And if we specifically come to the area of domestic violence, we see that the justice response system nowadays, for example, like hotline services, shelter homes are not now properly available due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, when we talk about the judicial system altogether, courts have postponed all their non-urgent hearings, and this will add to the backlog of cases. Already there are so many cases relating to women which are pending in the court, and this will just pile up or add up to the backlog of the cases which are pending in the court. Further, it will also lead to delay in justice delivery. Now, another important concern is also about ICT for remote access. Now, through video conferencing, we can say, or telephonic hearing. In the remote access area, these are very much difficult, where e-justice program is not able to reach, and the conditions there are worsening. So this is also an important area which must be taken into consideration. For that, we see that according to the Sustainable Development Goal 2020, 2030, it provides for access to justice for all. That is promoting the rule of law at national and international level to ensure equal access to justice for all. Now, SDG 16 specifically talk about peace, justice, and strong institutions, where providing access to justice is one of the key agenda. In light of that, there is an important decision given by the Delhi High Court, which talks about that bail application won't be allowed for under trial prisoners in cases of sexual harassment of women, those who are charged under the POCSO Act, and those who are tried under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code relating to rape. The accused of rape will not be granted, under trial prisoner will not be granted bail during this matter. The next issue is about digital divide. So digital divide during COVID-19 is one of the major challenge. Many women are facing barrier due to mobile phone and internet connectivity, which is leading to curtailment of access to justice. And this is magnified by the digital divide because there is a gender gap in access to information and resources too, because according to a recent study which was there, it is found that females who don't have access to mobile phone is the percentages are 16%. Okay, female those who have access to mobile phone, the percentage is around only 16% if we compare that with that of males. So, but in relation to that, the Supreme Court have given a very important decision that all the high courts and district courts should use video conferencing technologies for physical appearance to be avoided as far as possible, that is limited. And court has specifically stated that the court shall duly notify and make available the facilities of video conferencing for all those litigants who do not have the means or access to video conferencing facilities. So if a particular litigant is living at a very remote village, so court will ensure it that this video conferencing or other facilities are available to them as a access to justice measure. The next is about restricted reproductive and health rights. Sexual and reproductive health rights of women are very important human rights, especially when they come under the part of Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. As a fundamental right, sexual and reproductive rights are now a fundamental right under Article 21. For many states, we find that sexual and reproductive health services to women are not a priority today because other healthcare facility for COVID-19 emergency is more a priority now. So what is happening due to that is that restrictions or inadequate availability of healthcare services, it adversely affecting the health of many women. Now, during and after pregnancy and childbirth and care are neglected. Like the women are not given adequate care, which is required during and after pregnancy or after the childbirth. Now, in certain cases, we also find that the child and the mother are being separated to prevent the spread of the contagion. So these are also some of the issues for relating to restricted reproductive and health rights of women. Now, landmark case of Calcutta High Court is very significant in relation to children protection home. The Calcutta High Court has said that women inhabitants of the children protection home, those who are there, they shall be given due care, and all the sanitation facilities of the female inhabitants, including maintaining the reproductive health, should be taken care of. Now, after having an overview about what are the challenges of gender justice that women are facing, it's a time to look about like what way forward do we look upon. Now, UN Women had come up with a 10 policy suggestion. To name few, first is recalibrate justice delivery. When we are talking about recalibration of justice delivery, here we are talking about how we ensure that access to justice is available to them. We also are talking about providing legal aid services to them through whether it is through video conferencing or through any other modes of system that is available. The next solution can be courts can pass interim order. What are interim order? For example, if a case is pending and the court has not pronounced the final judgment, court can give interim order in between the case and provide immediate relief to the victim in forms of any compensation or grant relief to the victim. So court can pass interim order uh, rather than the final orders if we wait for the final orders then. Now, how addressing digital divide can be there? We can look into for exploring alternatives. For example, if digital divide were not able to reach to the remote areas, we can talk with community-based paralegal organizations. We can engage them so that they go to the remote area and they spread this access to justice concept. Now, last suggestion is that uh, no one should be left behind. We are talking about, when we're talking about justice, we can't live a group or a group of women, especially when we're talking about special attention need to be given to the poor rural women so that justice is being attained. Now, what are the challenges ahead? We have talked about during pandemic, what are the challenges of gender justice that women are facing. But then after pandemic, what shall we do, or what are the new problems that would be there for access to justice concept? First one is relating to pending backlog of cases. As we know that there are so many cases pending in the court, especially relating to violence of women, whether it is rape, whether it is custodial, whether it is rape, whether it's sexual harassment, all these cases need to be fast tracking. So already these cases are pending and additional cases are being added. So we need to fast track these cases after this COVID-19 pandemic ends. The next is about socioeconomic rights. So what are socioeconomic rights? When we are talking about socioeconomic rights, it's mostly about the right to food and the right to shelter. How will state address all this concern after this pandemic is over? Because all these are also fundamental rights. The other is about right to livelihood. How will the state ensure that the right of livelihood of all the women are being ensured, especially that of the woman and the rural woman? So these are some of the concerns and the challenges ahead to foster gender justice, where a concerted effort is needed at all the institutional level, especially how access to justice can be managed so that it reaches to every individual or every woman at the core. I think this I come to the end of this lecture. I have given an overview idea about what is gender justice, what are the present challenges, and what are the implications of gender justice. I think it will add upon to how we see gender justice today and what are the laws relating to gender justice. Now, thank you everyone for a patient hearing. I also would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present on this topic. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your views on the various laws related to women and also the challenges faced by women during the pandemics. Now we will go for the interactive session. One of the participants, her name is Kriti. She is asking, actually her question is in the comment box. She is asking that what are the laws to protect women in the Indian Constitution? However, you have answered this question, but just if you can again gist it out for the participant.
Okay. It is a very important a question which she has asked, although I have already mentioned it in the slides that what are the specific laws. I want to again just point it out that when we are talking about gender equality or gender justice, our constitution has since the adoption of the constitution, our framers were very much aware that how women should be given specific importance. For that, they have mentioned or given numerous provisions in the constitution, whether it is in form of fundamental rights, whether it is form of directive principles of state policy, or fundamental duties, as I have said. And apart from that also, there are in the entire scheme of the constitution, we find there are so many provisions. Like to state few, like I've told you about that article 14, which talks about equality of law, that there shall be equality before law and equal protection of law. When we go to article 15, it talks about that there shall not be discrimination on the basis of sex. Now this is only about formal equality which we are talking about. As I've already told, that our constitution also specifically talks about substantive equality, which like you find in article 15 clause 3. So like these are some of the important laws. You can also find like under article 23, you can also find under article 39 clause A, 39 clause D, and fundamental duties also article 51, where it is talking about that renouncing derogatory practices against women. So all these are few of the provisions relating to women, which is being specifically provided in the constitution. I think everyone, it's not for men, it's not just for women, but everyone should be knowing about their rights.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, for your answer. The next question is, her name is Sneha. She is asking that, is there any law being framed during these pandemics?
Oh, okay. See, if you talk about the concept of law, it is not just limited to whether just legislature is passing a bill. It is not limited to that. Like all the decisions of the government, suppose government is passing any kind of executive orders, like for you can say the rules that during COVID-19 what you have to follow, whether you have to follow, you have to wear a mask under the social distance norms that have been set out by the government, that what do's and don'ts, all these are in forms of rules, policies. So when we find these are also included under the laws. So there are, like you can say that n number of things that are being filed, so it can be just limited.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your answer and being with us. Once again, I thank you for sharing your insight on this topic. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you all the organizers and all the participants.
Now I welcome the next speaker, Professor Olajumok Familoni, ma'am. She is the chairman and founder of ICLED Business School and Management Consultancy based on Lekki, Lagos, Nigeria. ICLED has been on the cutting edge of developing leaders and entrepreneurs in Nigeria for over 16 years. Professor Ola Familoni is the Chairman, Board of Trustees, Global Initiative for Entrepreneurship and Capacity Development, an NGO focused on the empowerment of the girl child. Professor Familoni is a professor of management and entrepreneurship, fellows at the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, Ontario, Canada, and fellow of Institute of Management Consultants. Professor Ola Familoni is a consultant of over 25 years. She is an OD practitioner, consultant, and works with numerous small businesses and founders and business directors in diagnosing organizational silos and charting a way forward to resolve and get the organization back to the desired state. She is the author of over 60 publications and 10 books on entrepreneurship and leadership. She has presented papers nationally and internationally in several states in the United States of America, South Africa, Abu Dhabi, UAE, Switzerland, and Greece also. She is a notable guest speaker at several forums on entrepreneurship. As an entrepreneur, she was a designer and manufacturer of apparel, uniforms, and high fashion in the USA for over 15 years. She sold her labels to major Fortune 500 companies, JC Penney's, Delta Airlines, Federal Expressways, and United Airlines. Ola Familoni is a facilitator and consultant on World Bank projects. She has worked in collaboration with DFID UK on teachers training and new methodologies of teaching. She organizes executive leadership programs in collaboration with foreign institutions in Spain and UK. Her firm ICLED Business School is in partnership with foreign universities in the field of leadership and enterprise and executive education for certificate programs, bachelor's and master's program. Familoni is currently a member of the think tank at the School of Global Studies, University of Salamanca in Spain, a member of the board of the London School of Social Enterprise, UK, a partner of ICLED Business School. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining this 3-day global lecture series. And it is nice to hear from you again. Please do share your insights on this topic with us.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhn. It's been always a pleasure speaking to you on your programs. I want to thank everybody, and I've listened to some of the programs, some of the papers that have been presented. I want to appreciate all the past speakers. My course today, and I'm going to make it very short and simple, is on achieving Millennium Development Goals in COVID through entrepreneurship education. And we all know that this is the topic for the now because of what is going on globally with the pandemic. First of all, let's look at what is the Millennium Declaration. It's an unprecedented global commitment and one of the most significant United Nations documents of recent time, and offers a common and integrated vision on how to tackle some of the major challenges facing the world. Now, when they had this declaration, they did not think that there was going to be a COVID. They did not envision a COVID, but at the same time, they did realize that entrepreneurship education is going to be quite important moving forward. So we want to appreciate that they noted that. The mandate is that someone says entrepreneurs are building communities that can build trust. And that's a very important currency. The mandate of the United States has endorsed entrepreneurship as an important means of accelerating this sustainable development programs. And as at July 16th discussion is talked about the role of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship innovation in the realization of the social and economic gains envisioned by the SDG goals, Sustainable Development Goals. So entrepreneurship plays an important role in creating jobs because one of the goals is to drive job statistics globally. Then entrepreneurs we know are the major source of job providers. There are so many, there's not so many global organizations, but it's entrepreneurs that hire 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. They absorb more majority of the world's population. So entrepreneurship plays an important role, and it's important that they're recognizing that. However, the global statistics is that nearly 800 million people now live in extreme poverty, earning $1.90 per day or less. So for the first time, the world has set a deadline to end extreme poverty by 2030. That is 10 years from now. And this is quite a feat. Let's now see what is going on with the COVID. We did realize that some 100 years ago, there was a Spanish flu that had 3 waves over 100 years ago. Lives and livelihood were affected, just as we're having now. Now we have a pandemic that has caused a global shift, almost 360 degrees in terms of education, in terms of employment, in terms of a lot of things have shifted. Real estate is being affected. Major organizations are being affected. Education is being affected. Aviation industries. There's no industry that has not been impacted by this massive economic slowdown. So the world will now be characterized by a massive slowdown because people are not able to work as soon, but they are working remotely. And this is the first time that we have heard about remote work being the in thing. It's usually for people who are on contract work and all that. Now, what now is the role of education, entrepreneurship education in this? It's now, because of the fact that jobs are being lost, it's now time for more innovation and more creativity to ensure that the governments of most nations, of all nations now, need to focus more than ever on developing and educating the populace for entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, innovation, technology, we have realized that the pace at which technology has come on now is faster than we thought it would be, because we didn't realize that it was going to be the digitalization of education as it is right now, where from K schooling to higher institution, everybody is now on technology, blended learning, more so now on e-learning. So it's going to be important that entrepreneurs, with innovation in technology is going to be very critical. So ICT entrepreneurship skills should be encouraged to present their social enterprises. So using technology to solve social issues becomes the order of the day. And the ideas will be presented before a panel to encourage technological talent, so that talent should match the 21st century workforce and entrepreneurial talent. We're going to see a lot of incubators coming into play. We're going to see a lot of incubators, and non-incubators, entrepreneurial tech labs. We're seeing a lot of technology labs now. I'm sure India is one of the worlds. I know that you are good in technology and software, so I know that there's a lot of technology labs in India, I'm sure, and a lot of organizations are coming up with replicating these technology labs also in other nations. So if support for social innovators and impact entrepreneurs does not materialize, then there's going to be a major crisis, because we can see that already the impact to the world on this pandemic is very huge. So we're going to be looking at calling entrepreneurs to encouraging entrepreneurial talents, encouraging entrepreneurs to get up and become more entrepreneurial. But what kind of education are we looking at now? Prior to now, we had more people, working on teaching entrepreneurship at higher levels only. But now, entrepreneurial education is now very vital almost at every level. And to meet the sustainable development goals, particularly as a result of the pandemic, where we know that most organizations are already falling, most organizations are closed, most organizations are having issues, it's going to be more vital now that entrepreneurial talents are encouraged, particularly in terms of technology. And for example, Nigeria, one of the poorest, one of the countries beginning to recognize the importance of entrepreneurs. The Bureau of Statistics says that in 2004, there was 75.5% of people, in urban areas, and 79.2% of people in rural areas. Now, how do we now get these people? We cannot leave them out of the population. We cannot, because they are substantial number. So this entrepreneurial education also needs to be taken, not just to the urban areas. We have to look at how we get them also into the rural and the remote areas of the world as well. About 45 to 50 million new jobs will be needed each year over the next 10 years, just to keep up with the growth of the world's working age population and to reduce unemployment. So how will this just be created? We do know that not just only multinational organizations can afford to do that, but it's going to come up from entrepreneurs, pushing on people, encouraging entrepreneurial talent, and giving entrepreneurial education. Now, what kind of support is now falling on nations to begin to proffer some kind of support for the small businesses, for entrepreneurial talent and recognizing entrepreneurial talent, so that these people can survive. Already, the first set of people that have been impacted majorly as a result of the COVID were entrepreneurs, small businesses that cannot survive in making payments, cannot survive because with the lockdown, there's been no income, there's no revenue. And so as a result of no revenue, the businesses collapsed. So major organizations, major businesses have collapsed right now. And we have identified the fact that it is these entrepreneurs that are needed to fulfill the job, statistics for the SDGs, for the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we are realizing that the COVID has brought about a closure of the majority of those institutions that are supposed to encourage entrepreneurial and absorb job capacity, then a lot of every nation in the world now needs to come together to determine what they are going to do with entrepreneurial education and how to ensure that entrepreneurs are given all the support that they need to survive, so that they can absorb people for jobs and they can have survival. Because you will believe that entrepreneurs are the bane and the many nations, of all nations. So now, the world and social enterprise, motivated by entrepreneurs and SMEs seeking to create value from solutions that address real social and environmental needs, such as food, clean energy, social cohesion, inclusive education, and more. These solutions cover all SDGs and apply circular economic practices, driving inclusion of vulnerable groups, encouraging sustainable consumption, and using new governance of financial models that put impact first. So we're going to be saying that it's a critical factor for not just Nigeria, where I fortunately live in Nigeria and live in the US as well, but not just for Nigeria alone. You can see that even the United States came up with the package, for the small businesses during the lockdown and all that. Major nations also need to do the same. And not only that, in my times with entrepreneurs, because we counsel a lot of entrepreneurs, realize that entrepreneurs really need a lot of management skills. They are lacking. True, they can have ideas. True, they can have talent. But sustaining the organization goes beyond just an idea or talent or something or feel good. It requires the maturity and the management skills to ensure that these organizations survive. So training and retraining of SMEs, of entrepreneurs, education-wise, it's going to be important. Say that all fear for their future, even the SMEs account for 50% of global jobs. And you see, they account for 50% of global jobs and more, and 23 to 61% of the national GDPs. They are vulnerable in times of economic distress, such as we have right now. At the same time, we are all convinced that our entrepreneurs and partners are well positioned to help shape a sustainable and inclusive economic recovery. So if they're well positioned, if they're assisted, if they're well shaped, probability that they will help to survive this shock that we have right now, this shock that the world is going through. Whether in Nigeria, whether it can meet the MDGs is important, other nations need to meet them as well. But the fear is compounded by the needs that we meet. We say that if the present trend continues, we are not likely to meet the MDGs. Without the COVID, there was a high probability that we wouldn't meet the MDG Millennium Development Goals. But now with the COVID, you can see that the probability has increased much more than ever in terms of, are we now likely to meet these Millennium Development Goals? Looking at the current situation where the people that are supposed to absorb the majority of jobs are collapsing. So it now behooves to me that it's important that we assist them in ensuring that they survive somehow. So the stimulus packages and whatever that has been being doled out should recognize in all nations that for our nations to quickly come back to recovery, it's going to be important for us to support and sustain the economic and entrepreneurial activities in all nations. All nations, not just India or Africa alone, needs to come to terms that quickly there is a need for all nations to come together and develop a blueprint, a framework for ensuring that entrepreneurial education and entrepreneurs particularly get the really kind of stimulus package, not just money, all that they need to survive and to sustain. Because if you look at prior slides I have shared, I've said that they are the major job absorbers for all economies. So if they're the major job absorbers for all economies, then it behooves us that they must be sustained. They must be sustained. So not just this platform where we are. I know that this is a program for global, people may be looking here, but it is important. I cannot say it is important enough, because we're going to see a lot of collapse, and then the youth, who are major issues right now, because they are despondent and they, for lack of not just entrepreneurial education, but for just hope. So to give them hope, if they begin to congregate together for lack of hope in all nations of the world, it's going to be worse than the coronavirus pandemic. So it's important that for the Millennium Development Goals to be accomplished, recognizing the fact that more than 50% of small businesses absorb the jobs, and we want job absorption as part of the goals, we want entrepreneurship survival as part of the goals, then something has to be done. It cannot just be on blueprint paper. It has to be done. Now, the facts are that oil, for example, Nigeria has oil, but we have realized that these are now, with what's all this going on, they've gone down. So it's going to be important to begin to impump money or funds into entrepreneurial talent, to come out with sustainable ideas that will absorb people. And the most basic and undisputed fact about extreme poverty is that it is extremely rural. It is very rural. Extreme poverty is found majorly in rural areas. And many nations, and I don't know that there's no nation of the world that does not have that particular, area, the rural. It's in the United States, it's in Nigeria. I've been to India, it's in India. I've been to Mexico. All the nations have some in England, UK, it's all everywhere has the rural. And it's in these areas that we see the probability of extreme poverty. So if our nation of the world continues at this rate of development, even in 2025, which is just 5 years' time, majority of world's population may come to be projected to live in urban, because they're going to drift into the urban areas. 60% of the population will still be in the rural, regardless. Now, so against this background, it is evident that rural development of entrepreneurial skills, vocational skills, incubators, technological incubators, needs to be flooding different areas of the world now, competition in terms of, technology. These are all the things that needs to be happening now. Through entrepreneurial education should be the bane of all nations now, coming together to recognize that it is important for us to have entrepreneurial education that allows these entrepreneurs to survive and thrive. So that the technological should also be targeted at the economically active poor in the rural areas as well. So emphasis on the entrepreneurship development of the rural does not only imply education, health, access to water and sanitation, and other, it includes other social investments as well, essential investments as well. So we are saying that attention now has to be paid to that percentage of people in the rural. In 2005, when I came to Nigeria 2005, and I started putting together artisans, ICLED now, artisans, and in the rural of Ogun State, with the assistance of the king of Badeko, and we started training these artisans, the market women, on how to develop more of their businesses, how to be clean, how to present their products, regardless of what it is, mechanics, and we were doing that. I think we did that for about 2 years. How to showcase themselves, and they were excited, and they saw progress in their businesses. We taught them customer service, how not to abuse their customers when they haggle below the price they want to sell. You know how they haggle in the open market. They will abuse them, but we taught them differently, how to embrace their customers, we did all this. And then we now had at the palace of the king, we now had them to bring their products so they can showcase to the world at the forum what they had. And they were happy, they were excited. That is the kind of, thing that should go on. We started it 13 years ago, it was 2005, 2006, 2007. ACLED was doing that. We then went into entrepreneurial education for the youth corporates, for the youth. Because the youth was so difficult because they all want to work in multinational companies and they are very, very fast. They want everything very fast. Microwave generation. They want money right now and yesterday. They don't understand that you have to build something from scratch up. You have to develop and nurture an organization or an idea, but they want it cookie cut. So we are in dire times right now. We're in dire times. If we don't bring this education to bear in that, organizations that are surviving, your father's organization, were built over time. They don't have patience for no money. They want money, and money yesterday and today and forever. And when they don't get it, they get into crime, they get into vices. Because they believe that they don't understand the concept of waiting. So if you're going to encourage them to go into entrepreneurship, then they have to be sustained. They have to be encouraged. They have to be nurtured. They have to be trained. So I cannot say with that more than ever, this is the time where all nations of the world should come together to nurture entrepreneurial talent and education, so that these youth who are a digital generation, they're digital minded. They don't understand weight. They don't understand nurture, because they are going to become an endangered species if we do not have a focused attention. Already, they are into a lot of vices that were shown when we were growing up as youth, and now everyday norm to them. So it's a whole world thing, not just one nation. So we doing what we can. We went into schools also. We started the program I said earlier called Catch Them Young. We're encouraging the girls, the girl child, don't get raped. Don't go after biscuits and little change. Start learning how to tie the headgear. Start learning how to do makeup. Start learning how to put beads together so that you can sell them and have little change in your pocket. And it was nice and was going on. Now COVID-19 has stopped it because we can't gather them again for now. So I want to conclude by saying that the nations of the world have something in our hands to meet the Millennium Development Goals for 2030. We have 10 years to go. And with the pandemic, it has also further exaggerated the situations worldwide. Planet Earth needs to take up this responsibility that entrepreneurial education is the way to go, because of the statistics that have proven that they are the ones that are going to absorb the jobs. They're the ones that are going to provide the jobs. They're the ones that are going to engage the minds of the youth. This mind that's full of immorality and vices and all you can think about needs to be captured now. Or else, all nations of the world or leaders will be to blame. Thank you. I hope I have made some points with this presentation, and I'll welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola ma'am, for sharing your invaluable views with us. And also, I would like to ask 2 questions which is coming up from the participants of this lecture series. One of the participants, her name is Sneha. She is asking, how can entrepreneurship education lead to development in the field of education itself?
Okay. Usually, the first thing I would say is the curriculum. Ingraining it in the curriculum of the schools. I have done a number of books. Some years ago, I worked with one state in my country where we developed a curriculum that would allow the students to be trained. Very easy curriculum that allows them to develop their passion into small businesses. So curriculum, entrepreneurial training, vocational training will be the way to go in the institutions, in all institutions. And then we should have labs, vocational labs spread all over, and they can even start competing within each other, because it's a global world right now. We're all where we are, and we're all communicating through this medium. So it's going to be through vocational education and at the same time, education in the schools as well. I hope I have answered that question.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your reply, ma'am, for your answer. And the next question, which is coming up, the participant's name is Romi. She is asking, how has entrepreneurship education changed over during this pandemic?
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah. How has entrepreneurship education changed over during this pandemic?
There is no, and right now, I'm not sure that there's even any entrepreneurship education going on right now. I'm not sure, because the kids are trying to survive on basic courses. The focus is just on them doing their regular classes in literacy, numeracy, and other subjects. I'm not sure that at the level of entrepreneurship education, particularly at the elementary level, I am not sure that is, much of that is going on. We are trying to encourage organizations. We're trying to encourage proprietors of schools to begin to engage the minds, because it's been proven statistically that the students that have interest in entrepreneurship do better in other subjects. Why do they do better in other subjects? Because of the fact that these it stimulates something in their brain, in their minds, that allows them to want to it gives excitement, and the excitement, trails into other subjects. So unless we, and I know that some people, some organizations, some schools, and some nations are already inculcating entrepreneurship education into their school curriculum. But right now, I'm not sure that even right now we do that much learning is not going on right now.
Thank you, ma'am.
So hopefully, yes, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer. Thank you so much, Ola ma'am, for joining us once again. It is always a pleasure to hear from you and hope to collaborate with you like this in the near future also. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
I, Dr. Tanuja Kumari, as the organizing secretary of this 3-day global lecture series, I would like to first of all thank all the speakers who joined us on the first day, Professor Ishrat Alam sir, Professor Farhad Nasween ma'am, Professor Olaju Mok ma'am, and also Hirany Mishra. I would also like to thank the inspiring force behind the organization of this 3-day global lecture series, the principal of our college, Dr. Shamila Rani, without whose support this organization would not have been possible. I would also like to thank all the participants and media for regularly being connected throughout the session of this lecture series. With this, we come to the end of the lecture series of the first day. Hope to join with you all on the next day tomorrow. With this, we come to the end of the 3-day lecture series of the first day. Once again, thank you all for joining in.